All right, welcome back. We are going to continue our part two of our final lecture on our final keynote on the Hindu traditions. I'm going to start with Tantra, and then we'll talk about yoga, and then we'll talk about a key Hindu figure who really introduced the Hindu traditions to the United States and became a popularizer of Hindu traditions in the United States. To wrap up our time in this final lecture. So let's get started. I hope we're doing well. Let me share my screen with you. And yeah, let's get into it. All right, cool. All right, so Tantra. We have Tantra um, is comes from the Hindu tradition, and also we'll see in the Buddhist tradition, especially the third vehicle, the Vajrayana Buddhism, also incorporates Tantra. So we'll return to Tantra when we later when we talk about one of the major branches or one of the major vehicles of the Buddhist tradition. Here in the Hindu tradition, Tantra, it means simply to stretch or to expand. To stretch or to expand is literally what Tantra means. It's based on a set of rituals and practices and also text. Tantra it's not for everyone, right? It's esoteric. And it's also a syncretic tradition. So it draws from multiple traditions and brings them together in what we understand to be the tantric tradition. Just for components of Tantra, there's Nana, which is one of the ways of liberation. There's yoga, practice. There's rituals, and there's conduct, how one lives one's life. The worship of deities and temples is largely based on tantric text and practices. So Tantra comes to the forefront um, when with regards to worshiping of deities and temples, which we've talked about earlier. That but among some Hindus, it's believed that even getting a site of a temple or a tower of a temple can bring spiritual benefits. Mantras are exceptionally important in both the Hindu and the Buddhist tradition. The belief in the power of the word and the words properly hymned, properly recited, is of significance in both these traditions. We'll return to this theme when we move on to the Buddhist traditions as well. But mantras have a transformational potency or energy. I'm going to, resist saying more about mantras now because we'll return to this topic when we get to the Buddhist traditions over the course of the semester. You can see here, by the way, you see this imagery here. You have a man and woman immersed and together. You see this in the Buddhist tantric traditions as well. This idea that there's a feminine and a masculine energy that need to be unbound and brought together, and those vital energies coming together has spiritual significance. It's profound. It's creative. It's productive. And so you see in Hindu art and in some Buddhist art that comes out of these tantric traditions, you see these two energies, the masculine and the feminine, being brought together. Talk about that more as well when we get to the Buddhist traditions. But just another image, right? Another image from the 10th or 11th century. You have these Indian lovers engaged in a tantric position. So let's move on. We'll return to Tantra in a little bit more detail at some point in the Buddhist traditions. Yoga, ascetic meditation, practice. It's this pathway that leads to moksha or liberation. Um, Yoga is both a physical and a mental discipline. The word itself, yoga, means to yoke. And so it's through these practices, these physical and mental practices, that one yokes the human spirit to the divine. Yoga was central to religious life or spiritual life in India for centuries beyond any anything pertaining to yoga being codified in written form. So recall with me, we began our time in the Hindu traditions, foregrounding, talking about what preceded the Hindu traditions, and recall those excavations in the Harappa civilization on the Indus River, right, between like the India-Pakistani border. In archaeological digs, interestingly enough, they found symbols of ones of a person in a yogic pose, very much in some ways representative of what we see here with this Hindu gentleman here in a very difficult yogic pose, right? So these traditions, the practices of yoga, apparently predate the Hindu tradition. The classic text is a collection of short fragments known as the Yoga Sutras. Sutra means scripture. So scriptures on yoga that are attributed to Patanjali in the 2nd century before the Common Era. So Patanjali's system, it includes moral, mental, and physical discipline, and it includes meditation as well. So this is here, these are like the 8 limbs that work in a symbiotic way together in the formation of the soul of the person on their path towards liberation. So you see this 8 limbs. You have the yama, the niyama, the environment, or the self, personal behavior. You have body postures, our asana, breathing techniques, the importance of breathing within these traditions is especially in the Buddhist and the Hindu tradition. So the importance of breathing connected to meditation is significant. Withdrawal of the senses, right? And the attachments that come with the senses, concentration and intense focus, contemplation and meditation, and union with the divine, which is really the ultimate goal, is samadhi, our union with the Brahman. So these are the 8 limbs. So these are 8 things to keep in mind, right? That are significant components of Patanjali yoga. Patanjali yoga in terms of that first limb, there's an idea of a first limb that consists of restraints, so avoiding violence, for example, and stealing and greed or um, lies or sexual acts. All of these are things that need to be avoided, and as one strives towards the path of moksha or liberation. And the second limb, so which is runs contrary to the first, are positive practices, like such as purity or the study of yoga, focusing on God with one's activities, with one's actions or karma, ascetical practices, restraining from doing doing things that tie us down, often like pleasures of the body, for example. So bodily postures and breathing techniques are exceptionally important within yoga, and ideal of detaching oneself from sensory stimuli, right? From things that distract from the real business of life, right? Of the Atman or the soul that weigh us down. So perfect concentration in meditation leads to union with God, with the Brahman, divine union with God, where the two become indistinguishable from one another. And this is called samadhi. Just briefly, the textbook mentions it, and it's interesting just to note because across religious traditions, often we see some maybe thinkers or maybe some beliefs or some practices that get that move beyond the confines of the given religious tradition in which they originated. And that's certainly something we see with yoga coming out of the Hindu tradition and going back to the Harappa civilization. It's rather interesting, right? This is a long-standing practice that has cross-cultural boundaries, linguistic boundaries. Yoga became popular in North America, at least since the 1970s, generally speaking on well-being, and stress reduction. So the introduction of yoga in the West by the late 19th century, currently, at least when this textbook was published in 2019, there was estimated 6 to 18 million um, people practicing yoga in the United States. It's big business. $27 billion yearly is spent in relationship to yoga by Americans in the United States. It's interesting stuff. Just like issues of like, and perhaps you've heard about like issues of copyright, right? And when it comes to certain types of yoga, which is kind of fascinating and interesting, the commodification of like spirituality or the commodification of religion is something we see across the religious traditions. And certainly here there's an element of that, perhaps, right, that has entered in. So again, just like you see within the aforementioned traditions, yogic traditions within the Hindu tradition, bodily postures and breathing techniques are important, and they're really core to yoga in North America. For Patanjali, bodily postures and breathing techniques were certainly important, but they were one part of a greater, concern that was a more that involved those eight limbs we talked about, those eight limbs from the previous slide. So yeah, so yoga, this is just an example of yoga, right? Yoga, this is yoga being a group participating in yoga at the Labyrinth at Grace Cathedral in downtown San Francisco. And I'm just using this image because you see they kind of bring it together, right? This is a sacred space from coming out of the Christian tradition in which people are doing yoga. And so you see this, and there's different perspectives, from different folks within different religious traditions with regards to the appropriateness of engaging in yoga, alongside their given religious tradition and religious beliefs. Some don't see any problem at all, and then others, as been my experience, are wary of participating in yoga if they come from a different religious tradition that isn't the Hindu tradition, because they associate it as something to be wary of, right? To be concerned about rather than something that could be embraced and incorporated. So it's different, and people have different perspectives, right? When it comes to if one should participate in yoga from within their particular religious tradition and religious location. So last topic to wrap things up, important figure, significant figure, that a figure that really introduces Hindu traditions, Hinduism, especially the Vedanta tradition, which we talked about in the previous lecture, which is part of this last keynote, going back to Shankara. It's Swami Vivekananda who brought and introduced Shankara's non-dualist Vedanta philosophical tradition to the United States. For that reason, the vast majority of Americans, when they think about the Hindu tradition or the Hindu philosophical tradition, they think about Shankara's non-dualist Vedanta tradition, even if they don't know it as such by name, right? They might not know Shankara's non-dualist Vedanta, but when they think about Hinduism, this is what they're thinking about. They're thinking about this non-dualism, right? That you are that type of Hindu tradition, Hindu philosophical tradition that we discussed in the last lecture. So, Swami Vivekananda, he believed that Western science could help India in material progress, and that Indian spirituality, it could lead the West to enlightenment. So he imagined, this kind of symbiotic relationship between these two traditions, the tradition of Western science in the tradition of Indian spirituality. The key moment is 1893, Chicago, at the World's Parliament of Religions. This was the first World's Parliament of Religions, which is this gathering, as the title suggests, of religious leaders from across the globe coming together to engage in dialogue, to engage in conversation, to engage in action, right? Together with the hope of advancing greater understanding, greater cooperation, and bringing light instead of heat into these conversations for the benefit of one another and for the benefit of the world. I'm trying to think. This is the first World Parliament of Religions was in 1893 in Chicago, and it's a rather famous moment in terms of world religions coming together. I think there's been maybe four or five. I forget there isn't a World Parliament of Religions conference all the time. There's been a handful, and the most recent one I think was a year or two ago. And so they've there's been ongoing interest in a dialogue between and across religious traditions. So Swami Vivekananda, he introduces the Hindu tradition, in particular the Shankara's non-dualist Vedanta tradition, to the United States, and it becomes the dominant way by which Americans think about the Hindu philosophical traditions. After his well-known speech at Chicago at the World's Parliament of Religions, he grew in popularity. He was invited to lecture at universities in both the United States and in Europe. Indeed, numerous prestigious universities tried to win him over and invited him to become professors at these prestigious universities. And Swami Vivekananda refused, right? Because he didn't want to be tied to any particular academic institution, but he wanted to have the liberty and the freedom to travel and to share and to lecture on Hindu philosophy, on the Hindu tradition across the globe. And that's what he did. And so he taught Shankar's non-dualist Vedanta philosophy, which becomes the definitive form of Hinduism in the West up to the present day. So here's an image, it's a blurry image. I mean, it's from 1893 at the World Parliament of Religions at Chicago. So you could see, right? You can see what kind of get a sense. I mean, one thing that in I mean, for me at least, I mean, you might not see this. One thing that stands out, great diversity in terms of different people from different religious traditions. I mean, that seems apparent, which is, a powerful thing to see, right? People coming together who maybe, come from different cultures and traditions. That's a beautiful thing to see from my perspective, at least. But something that's a little bit, that jumps out to me is we're the women, right? We're the women. I guarantee at the most recent World Parliament of Religions conference, which happened a couple of years ago, I'm pretty positive it's going to be a 50-50, probably. That would be my guess. I mean, so that's an interesting transformation, just kind of a side note there, right? That religious traditions and religious authority was predominantly centered around males, all right, but amongst men, but it's been kind of balancing out over the last couple generations. And so that's interesting. But anyways, you can see this is the moment at this particular conference that Swami Vivekananda gave his famous speech. And here we have an image as well, a couple images for us. Why not? Here's part of that famous speech. Let me read it to you. Again, this is a significant speech. It gets cited often as a kind of this turning point, this speech that really kind of ushers in um, and brings the Hindu tradition to the United States. Vivekananda's address to the Parliament of World Religions, 1893 in Chicago. Sisters and brothers of America, it fills my heart with joy unspeakable to rise in response to the warm and cordial welcome which you have given us. I thank you in the name of the most ancient order of monks in the world. I thank you in the name of the mother of religions. And I thank you in the name of millions and millions of Hindu people of all classes and sects. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and a universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, the speech continuing here, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and of all nations of the earth. You have the ellipsis, dot, dot, dot. I took out a little bit there. This present convention, this present gathering at the Parliament of World Religions is in itself a vindication. In itself, it's a declaration to the world of the wonderful doctrine preached in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which we discussed extensively earlier in our time on the Hindu traditions. He quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, a part that we discussed earlier in our time in the Hindu traditions. Whosoever comes to me through whatsoever form, I reach him. All men are struggling through paths which in the end lead to me. Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But their time has come. And I fervently hope that that bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or by the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal, God. I do not come. That concludes the speech, that the famous speech, a powerful speech that really signaled the beginning of bringing the Hindu tradition and a greater understanding of the Hindu traditions to the United States. Significant speech. And beyond his speech, of course, again, he lectured at universities throughout the United States and throughout Europe as a way to educate, in a way to promote the Vedanta Hindu tradition. Here, wrapping things up, this is from another moment during one of his lectures in America. Swami Vivekananda declared, I do not come to America to convert you to a new belief. I want you to keep your own belief. I want to make the Methodist a better Methodist, the Presbyterian a better Presbyterian, the Unitarian a better Unitarian. I want to teach you to live the truth and to reveal the light that is within your soul. And there you have it. There you have it. All right. So, within the confines of our 15-week semester, that's what we have for the Hindu tradition. As we progress forward, our next religious tradition over the next couple weeks will be the Buddhist tradition. All right. I sincerely hope you're doing well. And thank you for listening. And I will see you next time. Take care.